There have been third parties or parties beyond the first two parties for much of American history. All of them have been flops.
We have this first past the post system, as they sometimes describe it. It's really more technically the single-member plurality district system, which means you win office if you come in first. And when you think about a congressional race, you have to have a lot of votes to come in first. And you can have a third party that's strong nationally. Let's say it gets 20% of the votes in a national election, and they're spread evenly across the country. How many seats in Congress does it get? It gets 0. In
the parliamentary systems in Europe and Canada and the British Commonwealth, you don't elect the prime minister. Either you vote for a member of parliament like Congress in your constituency, that's what they do in Canada or Britain, or you vote nationally in a proportional representation election, where each party nominates people and they get the same proportion of members of parliament that they get in the vote.
The virtue is that a lot of people can have their voices heard in the legislature. In our case, if you don't feel represented by one of the two parties, it's difficult for you to be heard. But the flip side of that is that when our election ends, you know which party is going to form the government. It's the Republicans or the Democrat. And so there's a direct correspondence between the votes cast and the government that results. In most parliamentary democracies, after the election ends, there's still some uncertainty because the parties then have to do a subsequent round of negotiations to determine who's going to be in government. So on the one hand, your party might have representatives, but on the other hand, the relationship between the vote you cast and the government that actually makes the laws that you live under may be very hard to predict even on the day of the election.
There have been times in our nation's history when third parties have affected the outcome of an election.
We have two dominant parties who erect high statutory barriers to get on the ballot by third party and fourth party.
If a third party takes disproportionately from one party rather than the other, they can be decisive. It's extremely rare for that to happen, however, in a national election. It's a very unusual situation.
A third party of the left or the right is a real hindrance to its best friends. A vote for a third party of the left is a vote for the right wing. Period. End of story. Conversely, that is true for the right. A right-wing party helps elect liberals. This point does not hold for Perot's party because it was a centrist party and it was taking from both sides.
It's ironic that, Ross Perot got 19% of the vote in 1992 and didn't affect anything. And Ralph Nader got 2.7% of the vote in 2000 and determined the outcome of the election. It's a winner-take-all electoral process. And if it's a close election, you have to make a choice. Do you vote for the man you prefer, or do you vote for the lesser of the two evils of the ones who actually have a chance?
Nader's probably not going to win. So, I mean, my vote, if I do vote for Nader, will be more symbolic than anything else.
In the Ralph Nader candidacy in the 2000 election, that 3% that Nader took nationally were primarily votes that would have gone to Al Gore, which could have changed the outcome of the 2000 elections.
I think particularly of all the people that signed ads for Ralph Nader, I think that this shows that they have no respect for the realities of how the American political system works. So imagine if somebody with Ralph Nader's ability and courage had run in Democratic Party primaries. Nader, of course, would have lost, but he would have accumulated some delegates, and they would have had to give him a chance to speak on national television, at which point he could have criticized all the corporations, presented his alternative plan, and then suggested everybody vote for Al Gore. And at the same time, he probably would have ended up an appointee in that government. Now he's made it so that it's unlikely that any Democrat would ever appoint any Nader-related person to a government position.
So sometimes third parties can kind of upset the balance between the two parties by pulling more votes away from one of the two than the other, and in a close election making a difference. The other function that third parties historically have had, and that's to essentially bring issues into the agenda that the two major parties, they never ignore these issues, but they're not paying enough attention to them. They're too difficult for them to deal with. And when a third party does that and succeeds with that kind of an issue, that's a wake-up call to the two major parties. And one or the other of them is likely to try to co-opt, take that issue on. And, that's what third parties do in our system. They don't win, but they sometimes make a difference.